This is one of the saddest stories that I wrote some years ago. Awaiting something of importance invariably stirs a number of emotions, an excitement of expectation, anticipation that is built up through hopes, invoking of past memories which tend to drift together to form a single blurred image of a reality where the mind has somehow filled in the gaps. But more than anything else, that sense of becoming very conscious of time. So it was on this particular evening, as the large brass pendulum swung lazily to and fro from the clock on the wall. The regular tick seemingly to drown out any other sounds within the house, as the mind became more aware of the minutes that were passing. At first the ornate black hands appeared to speed around the face, as though the thoughts of the past were coming flooding back. George, for we shall call him by this name, had spent most of the day preparing for this event. He had finished work early, walked swiftly to the local store, gathering those provisions that are the necessities of our everyday lives, and then browsing a little to purchase a few items with which to mark this particular occasion, including a bottle of wine and some candles. By the time he had reached the cottage, which was his home, it had become necessary to pursue in some haste the preparations for the evening. The house had been cleaned and dusted that very morning, but it seemed necessary to repeat the process, carefully removing ornaments from shelves and dusting again, putting another last layer of polish upon the table before setting to places. He had placed the sticks neatly upon the crumpled newspaper in the fireplace, topping this miniature bonfire with some small logs. He watched as the flames had sprung into life, then hastened to his other tasks. He showered and shaved, selecting fragrances that he favoured over the years, and which had been remarked upon with some affection at the last meeting. Now he sat rather nervously in the chair, his body leaning slightly forward rather than relaxing against the softness of the furnishing. The small oak table shone with the reflection of the early evening sun as it sank lower to mark the closing of the day. A curtain wafted gently in the breeze, the freshness of the air drifting across the room and bringing with it the sweet smell of honeysuckle, which had been carefully trimmed over the years to grow around the cottage window for just such a purpose. There had been happy times, the days spent together, the messages that had flown to and fro, the long conversations on the telephone, walks into the nearby forest, strolling arm in arm through great avenues of oaks, the stream of sunlight shining through and bringing warmth to a conversation that occasionally turned to laughter as some fond remark caused amusement. A holiday in the Northern Isles, standing on the shores and watching the waves build, break, and come rushing in towards their feet, whereupon they would laugh with joy as the water splashed against the feet. Long hours spent lazing in the sun, letting the rays beat out their pattern upon bare skin, the memory to linger on into the fall. Climbing the grey mountains, clambering o'er the rocks, running across the purple heather of the moorlands, all seemed to mingle together, and he felt happy, contented in what he had done, in what they had done, together. The evening was drawing darker. George stood up, walked over to the doorway and switched on the light, then walked slowly back to the chair and reclined again, about to let the past flow more freely through his mind. His attention was distracted by the fluttering of a moth that, having entered his room, was engaged in a game of life and death, spiralling ever closer to the burning bulb, mistaking it for a larger heavenly object upon which its course would normally be plotted. Its life was spared by the passing of a car, which came to rest across the road, headlights blazing, and the moth lurched in some crazy flight across the room and found its safety beyond the open window. He could remember what she wore on that first occasion, a blue sweatshirt embroidered carefully with the form of a butterfly. He recalled how much he had thought it had suited her, new jeans, and the floppy hat perched upon her head, her brown hair shoulder-length flowing behind her as she stepped from the train. Her face looked puzzled until she had spotted him upon the same platform, and breaking into a smile the hesitancy vanished, and she had run towards him. They had exchanged their photographs some weeks before, but this was the first time they had truly gazed upon each other. And neither was young in years, and it was not the first love of their lives, but it was to be the love that mattered. That evening, when they had first made love together, their bodies becoming slowly intertwined, the passion rising as pulses raced until they had collapsed in exhaustion of their efforts, lying contentedly to relax with the joy of their achievement. Of course, they had made love many times since, but the first time would always remain very special. He glanced at the clock. Was that really the time? She should have been here by now, but she would have phoned if there had been any delay. He felt sure of that, quite sure. George was suddenly aware of a new sound, a tap that was dripping slowly but rhythmically in the kitchen. It must have been dripping for some time, but he was only now aware of it, as if it had started just at that particular moment. Its sound appeared to get louder, drowning out the regular ticking of the clock. His mind seemed to focus in on this happening, as if it were of some great significance. Yet he felt no compulsion to get up and do anything about it. He just sat almost motionless in the chair. He could see the tap through the open door. He did not have to lean forward or move his body in any way. His eyes became fixed on this event, watching the clear water slowly forming into a small hemisphere, then becoming larger, but still apparently remaining glued or stuck in some way to the metal rim of the tap. Eventually the hemisphere became too heavy in its form, moving away from the rim with a tail rather like that of a small comet, until it broke away completely and hurtled on its downward trajectory, drawn on by gravity, and impacting with the sink to shatter into 100 smaller droplets. He could not actually see this completion of the event, but he knew that it happened. Time and again he watched the event being repeated, for no apparent reason, until his mind seemed to awake him with a jolt, bringing him back to the purpose of the evening. Much had been promised at their last meeting. They had talked through the sunshine of the day, through the meal of the evening, and into the night, until the hour came when she had departed. Her form had disappeared into the night, silhouetted against the moonlight. They had pledged their love for each other, talked of their plans for the future, but she had to depart for a while where work had called her to some distant location, albeit in a temporary manner. They would spend a last evening together before her departure, and make then their plans for her return. A future that beckoned for both was now blossoming in the mind. The ticking of the clock had become more noticeable again, only the hands seemed to move more slowly now. The pendulum seemed to track a weary path across the wall, then return more slowly upon the same course, moving steadily and predictably, yet going nowhere on its journey through time. George tried to focus upon the face. He could make out the name of the maker and his pattern, though this might be because it were imprinted in some small corner of his mind, and was at that moment being transmitted across pathways to form the picture before his eyes. He was, however, unsure of the true position of the hands. The vision appeared misty beyond his gaze, and he peered into the mist rather as one who has misplaced his spectacles and searches anxiously for their true position. The clock face, enamelled with the form of a wood nymph, seemed to resemble her form, then drifted away as if vanishing into a forest. He reached out and clasped the wine bottle he had placed on the small oak table. Uncorking it, he poured the liquid slowly into a tall glass, not realizing that he was already predicting the course of events. More memories, sometimes fleeting glimpses of some particular moment shared, sometimes drifting onwards to what was hoped for, until the memory seemed exhausted in its search for more. Thoughts were slowed and events seemed dimmer, hard to recollect in completeness. The eyes slowly closed, the mind drifting away with the night. A tear slowly formed in the corner of the eye, became separated, and rolled its uneven path down the cheek, leaving behind a moist trail that glistened in the light of the dying fire. It was not a deep sleep, not the resting of a mind at ease. Several times he appeared to stir, when an owl broke the silence of the night in search of its prey, and once coughed nervously, when a sudden downdraft sent a small cloud of blue smoke from the dying fire billowing into the room. He was awoken by the sudden fall of the flap of the letterbox, and a small blue envelope fluttered to the floor, coming to rest on a well-worn doormat. He rose slowly, the clothes creased from the cramping of an unnatural resting place. He wiped the sleep from his eyes and walked over to the door. The writing was hers. There was to be no mistaking the neat, well-formed letters of his name. Picking up the letter, he slid a finger behind the flap, tearing the envelope open in jagged segments. Taking from the envelope several small sheets of perfumed paper, he walked back to the chair and sat down. Unfolding the sheets of paper, he read.